Hello, my name is Liana Moss, and this is my Evolution in the News project. The title of my article is Giraffes Aren't Just Giraffes. Turns out there are 4 species, and I found the article in the Washington Post. So the main points of the news article is obviously that there are 4 species of giraffes instead of just 1 species with 9 subspecies. And the other main point was that it's going to have a huge impact on conservation of giraffes. The definition of species is a group that can reproduce to make fertile offspring, and subspecies are a group within that group that technically can reproduce but don't due to geographic differences, which can be really subjective. An example is in polar bears and brown bears. They actually have reproduced to make fertile offspring, as different as they are, and those are geographic differences that have led to their differences genetically, but even they walk that fine line of speciation. And giraffes are actually some of the most endangered large mammals, so the impact of conservation is that instead of just thinking of giraffes as this, like, oh, we need to conserve the giraffes, we need to actually conserve all 4 species to make sure that we don't accidentally lose one to maintain the gene pool. So the methods mentioned in the article is that tissue samples were collected from each of the 9 subspecies. The sequences of interest were amplified using PCR, and PCR uses an enzyme that replicates DNA in a sequence and makes it easier to read. The sequences were then analyzed with BEAST, which stands for Bayesian Evolutionary Analysis Sampling Trees, which uses algorithms and probabilities to analyze and develop phylogenies that aren't based on a single tree, but a clock model. And the scientists found definitive genetic differences between the subspecies to actually separate them into the 4 species. My comments on the article were that the Washington Post did a really good job of reporting the science. They reported it using layman's terms, but still stayed very scientific with their reporting. The hook was about the conservation status and just the fact that people like animals, which is just a very natural hook. The Washington Post did make a note about the relative number of studies compared to the white rhino, because people know that there are only a few white rhinos left in the world. There's a lot more studies and a lot more interest in the white rhino than in the giraffes, especially considering that seeing giraffes as one species doesn't create the same need in conservation for the everyday person as knowing that one of the species has 10 times as many giraffes as one of the other species, and you really need to make sure that all of the species of giraffes are equally conserved. So, there's not as many studies yet, but there's probably going to be. And the findings weren't really controversial because no one's really saying, we don't want to conserve the giraffe. Obviously, they're endangered. People want to conserve them. And this isn't really the first time that it's been, put out there that maybe there isn't just one species of giraffe. But it is the first time that definitive tests have proved it, and there are going to be more studies to solidify their results. And there are obviously further applications for the information in conservation and stuff like that. But overall, the Washington Post just did a really good job. So my source links come from the original article from the Washington Post, the journal article that the Washington Post referenced, and the definition of BEAST from their website.